Hello and welcome to the Raising Athletes podcast. My name is Kirsten Jones. I'm a peak performance sports parenting coach, author of Raising Empowered Athletes. How do we raise not only strong, brave, resilient, but kind, caring, and empowered athletes? I've been doing this now for 8 years on the podcast because I believe we all need partners in life. We all need anchors in the storm. We all need help along the journey, both as we learn and my joke is when you get pregnant, you're like, sweet, I just got the book, what to expect when you're expecting. Every single week, you know exactly what to expect, and you think you've got it nailed. And then this human arrives, and you're like, crap, I don't got it. I don't know how to do this, right? And then as they age, my book is all around helping them go through the sports journey. But today's guest is going to talk about the rehumaning, the opportunity that we have to really help ourselves and our children as they grow and go through what has become a more and more chaotic world. So welcome back, Stephanie Malia Krauss. I love speaking with you. Full disclosure, we've known each other, I think, like almost 3 years now. You welcomed me into your beautiful group that talks with parenting authors around how do we make this journey a great one, not only as parents, but as authors, as community members, and as we get back. And I'm so excited for your next book, How We Thrive. It's got all the nuggets that parents are looking for, kids are looking for, to make a difference in their lives.
Oh, Kirsten, I could not be happier to be here with you. And, at the Krauss house, we have your book on display as my husband took on coaching our high schooler. And we were in sort of the thick of middle and high school sports. And he would take copies of Raising Empowered Athletes and give it to any coach who would accept it and say, hey, this is what we should all be doing. So it will be so wonderful to dig in and blend what both you and I have learned over these last few years and across the whole lifetime of our experiences, both as athletes and as moms.
Thank you. Oh, and so I always write, I know as an author, you're like, oh, somebody actually shared my book. Like it's the best thing ever. If you find it helpful and you share it, just like this podcast, these are the tools that we all need. So let's talk about like why this book, How We Thrive. How did you get to like, okay, I need to write another book and here's what I want to write about.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the third book in 6 years. I don't know if I can continue to keep this pace of publishing, but to understand why I wrote How We Thrive, we have to actually take it back to when my first book, Making It, came out. So the first book that I wrote, Making It, was about what today's kids need to be ready for tomorrow's world. It was very future facing. The problem was that it came out at the height of the pandemic. All of our households were homeschools. We were all like inside. This was the scariest moment of the pandemic. Obviously, I could not go out on a book tour because we were still sanitizing our groceries at that point when they would show up at the garage. And so I was connecting with people through Zoom. And I am someone who has to feel a place and really enjoys connecting with people in real life. And so what I did was I developed just 3 questions that I would ask every single group that I met with to try to get a sense of how they were and what was going on. And so 6 years ago, I started asking every group of teachers or parents, coaches, youth workers, how are your kids? How are your families? And how are you? And what I found at that time was that the answers were always the same. And it didn't matter if we were talking about kids or the adults. Everyone collectively was feeling overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, and tired. And that made sense because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And the other thing that started happening was people would say, hey, I see that you are writing about what these kids need to be ready for the future, but I'm worried they're actually going to burn out or give up before they get there. What do they need to be well right now? And so 2 years later, my next book came out, Whole Child, Whole Life. And that was all about what young people need to be well and to experience lifelong thriving. And we talked about that book on the show. But what I did was I went out on the road at that point on tour and continued asking the questions. How are your kids? How are your families? And how are you? And the problem was, even though the world had opened back up, the center responses of what parents were telling me and teachers were telling me and coaches and counselors was that they were even more overwhelmed, more overloaded, more stressed, and more tired. And our kids were getting increasingly depleted. And so here we are 6 years later, and I continue to ask those 3 questions every time that I connect with a group. How are the kids? How are your families? How are you? And it doesn't matter what community I am in. It doesn't matter what that community looks like, how wealthy or poor they are, what the geographic area is. Every adult I have spoken to, every adult I have asked those questions to across the United States and globally has answered in the same way. We are all overwhelmed. We are all feeling deep depletion when life is going poorly and when life is going well. Even when we should feel like things are good, we feel like our calendars are too crowded, that our lives are too busy, that we cannot keep up and keep pace, and our kids are feeling that intensely. So I wrote How We Thrive as the natural sort of next step of, okay, so we know what you need to be ready, we know what you need to be well, but actually all of us, adults and kids alike, we're all having a hard time humaning right now. There are forces at play that are making it harder and harder to protect the best parts of being human. And so what would it take for us in this increasingly changing, challenging world to be the best versions of ourselves and to reclaim how we're made to live and learn and work? And so that was the birth of How We Thrive. I knew I could not do that alone. And so this book relied not only on my experience in education and youth development, but I went out and talked to over 100 scientists and experts in human development, human performance, evolutionary biology, I mean, you name it, to really make sure we could get a book that was super readable, but so steeped in the research of what it means to be us and the best versions of us.
I love the metaphor you used is prepare, we can't control what happens to us. We can only control how we respond, and the metaphor of preparing for rough waters, right? And I think that one is so apt with kids because almost daily, right when you think you've got it nailed with one kid, something else happens with another kid. And my joke is, if all 3 kids are doing well, then there's something wrong with the dog, right? Or there's just constant tumultuous waters. There are days of clear sailing, but there are so many days where, and I know, you feel overwhelmed, right? That's who this is targeted at, is parents who understand that they want tools, and that's what this. I love the drawings that you've got. It's so beautiful, right? And it breaks it down really clearly. So if you're a parent who's looking for, I love inspiration, but it's also sometimes you just need so what now what? What do I do with this information? And you've broken this down into really clear chapters that, like you said, you can either read it cover to cover, or you can read. And I kind of like that, choose your own adventure, because sometimes our kids are clear sailing, I don't need it, but other times okay, I have an issue about X or Y. Maybe can you talk a little deeper about how you structured the book and what are some of the bigger topics?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, let me say that there are a couple of principles I have when I write. The first is that I'm always writing for the busy grown-up who's caring for kids, always. And so there's the book option, which, as you mentioned, could be read cover to cover or just in slices and the pieces that you really want to focus on, with key takeaways of here are some basic 1 minute, 5 minute, 10-minute strategies to put this piece into play. And here are some more advanced based strategies. If you really want to take on protecting sleep, or you really want to take on protecting movement or play. I also always do an audiobook, because I know for me that right now is like what works oftentimes. I'm driving a kid to practice. I am making dinner, and I've got my earbuds in. And so there's always an audiobook option. And then new this time was that I created a whole resource repository, a brand new website, rehumaning.com, that has simple explainer videos and actually pulls out some of those illustrations by Manuel Herrera, who's a internationally recognized sketchnoter. So his job is to illustrate in a way that helps us make complex concepts much easier to understand and remember. And he's so good at what he does. He's also a parent of 2 teens who are also he's got an athlete and a thespian. But there are explainer videos and these downloadable resources where if you see something and you're like, I just need the 2-minute version of this, and I want to see it or hear it from Stephanie directly, or I want to really pull out, like for thinking about movement, I've got a table there on like 50 mini moves for us to get moving if we're not in the ways that we need to. So that's kind of the landscape of resources. But I always want anything that I write to be accessible. You can read it and immediately understand. You do not need a degree in human development or exercise science for the chapters that talk about movement and play and exercise. You don't need to be a sleep scientist, and that they're super actionable. And I think the reason why is sometimes, I don't know about you, but like sometimes I think I know more about computers and cars from like the manuals or the YouTube videos on like, how do I fix this, than I do about the human that I am and the humans I'm raising. And we deserve to have the education that we need on how we're wired and how we're made. For example, one of the chapters in How We Thrive is about sleep. And I had no idea until I was researching this, but it makes sense. We sleep for more than 1/3 of our lives. So if we're going to be 100, we're going to be sleeping for 30 years. And yet, we don't know about it, right? Like, unless there's really a problem, we obsess about how our babies are sleeping when they're newborns. Everything revolves, did the baby nap? How's the baby sleeping? The pediatrician asks about it. But once they're done being babies, while sleep remains as important, we stop asking about it. We stop attending to it in deep ways. And so one of the parts of How We Thrive was really just my commitment to all of the adults that I've gotten to connect with who are trying their damnedest to do a good job with their own lives and their kids' lives, to say, like, here's the science and strategies and language that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sleep is one of those that and I think for us, like, I never remember it being talked about as a priority when we were growing up. It was, in fact, my mother showed up on a Saturday morning with the vacuum cleaner under my bed at 8 a.m., right? Like, that was what parents did back then, was like, you don't need to sleep, get out of bed. That means you're lazy, right? And now we're like, oh, they're a teenager. Their brains are growing. They need the downtime, right? But understanding things like that then help them and I think that's what's great about your book, is it's about how do we prevent it versus how do we fix it after. We were talking before we started recording about injury and how do you overcome injuries. And of course, but one of the best ways to do that is to put yourself in that place, right? So what can we do? And we can't avoid, some things are going to happen in life that aren't preventable, but how are we going to respond to it? And that's what I enjoyed, we have resource scarcity. You were talking about resource scarcity in there, and how do we plan for, I think that's what a lot of parents struggle with is, okay, I've got 3 kids, and I get that question a lot. So yeah, and I've got 3 kids in 3 different sports and music lessons, and how do me being a priority in all of this is not a possibility, and how do I help my kids, like to your point about sleep, help them prioritize it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so let's talk about that. So, what I do when in How We Thrive, and if I were to have given it a different title, which not is not a good marketing title, it would have been like How to Human, even when it's hard, um, but it opens up by talking about, as you mentioned, the sort of waters we're in, the dangerous weather of modern life. And what I wanted to have folks understand is that if we just say, like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so stressed, that feels so nebulous. It feels so all consuming. And it's really helpful to understand what are the weather conditions of modern life that are impacting us, that are raining down on us, that are pushing us off course, right? The kind of winds of that weather. And so, and what is different than in the past? And I think a really important, encouraging and helpful way to understand this is that when we think about how fast and frantic and like frayed our lives are right now, we've only been living this way for like 1% of the 1% of human history. So humans have been around walking and talking this way for 300,000 years. The Industrial Revolution was 300 years ago when we started focusing more on what we're doing instead of how we're doing, right? We went from sort of hunter-gatherer foragers to farmers and then to factory workers. But then sort of the last few years have felt way faster. The acceleration of AI and tech and globalization and all of the disruptions after the pandemic. And so what I would say is, before I jump into the dangerous weather, the most encouraging question that I keep asking myself, the heart of this idea of rehumaning, is who said we have to live like this? Mm-hmm. Like, we've actually only been doing this for about 1% of the 1% of human history. There is a different way to live that actually people were doing for 99% of our history. And so what's been happening then in the 1% of the 1% that is making everything feel so overwhelming and making us feel so depleted? So from the research and from news headlines and from my own experience working with folks across the country, I've found that there are 4 primary forces, weather forces, at play. The first you just talked about. It's this sense of being completely overtapped, time and resource scarcity. Now, I've got 2 teen athletes, middle and high school, and I feel this in an intense way. So last week, my Evan, my husband was traveling, and so I was on my older son, he plays high school basketball and baseball, and they overlap for like a week. And so I was on his schedule. Normally we divide and conquer, and so God bless single parents everywhere. I was raised by one, but like, I was solo parenting, so I had the brunt of both. And my 9th grader has to wake up at 6 a.m. in order to catch the bus to get to school. And then after school, he's got 3 hours of practice. And then he gets home and he has all of his homework and studying. And so he was up from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. But then me, as a high school sports mom, I also was driving back and forth to the high school. I was having to drop off things, or he doesn't have his license yet, so pick him up from practice, and the times were changing, and we were both exhausted. So I wear this Oura ring that measures my sleep, and by Wednesday, so we're just talking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, of being on my high schooler's schedule, my high school athlete's schedule, I had more sleep deprivation clocked than I typically would in a month, in just 3 days. And so you think about the accruing of that exhaustion over time. And then from a resource scarcity perspective, we all know, anybody listening to your podcast, the incredible invisible and visible costs of supporting our teen athletes, whether it's for the sport or the equipment or the training, or in this case, we've got an injury this week, the physical therapy costs, plus just life in general. So there's real resource scarcity. We're overtapped, big force. The second force is just overworked. It is the chronic busyness, the idea that like everything is about producing and performing and not playing and being. And in the book, I have a chapter on flow. I call this the difference between faux flow and slow flow. Like we have this sense of if we get through all these tasks, or for our athletes, all of these drills, if we get all of these games, if we fit things in, that somehow that will make us better. And yet it just is exhausting us. You know, we're pushed to the max with busyness and hustle. The third force is the role of addictive tech. So addictive, manipulative tech is absolutely depleting us, and it preys on the developmental vulnerabilities of our kids. And so that is a force that has only existed in recent history and is, you know, very different from the past. And then the last force is being overwrought. It's just the scariness of the world. I think about it as existential exhaustion. That at any point you get on a plane, you send your kids to school, you're planning a vacation, you're at a big event with a lot of people, there is concern that something terrible could happen. You know, you live in an area of the country that was devastated by natural disasters, and people kept working and going to school, and the chronic busyness and the time scarcity, it didn't let up as you were also walking through the recovery from fires. And so together, I think we have to be clear-sighted that when those forces are running our lives, that they pull us further and further away from the human experiences and connections that we need. And so that's the idea of rehumaning, which sets up the whole larger part of the book, is to say, like, it takes work. It takes navigational sense of how are we going to work around the time realities of, like, I can't change my kid's school schedule right now or his sports practices. How does he still get the sleep he needs? How does he still get opportunities for downtime or for playful movement? And so, you know, we've got to be more creative about how we protect our human essentials while also giving ourselves a lot of grace that, like, we're up against some really rough weather right now.
You know, you've done so much research, and I always enjoy listening to you talk about those different aspects. The one around tech, can you talk about, did it come up in your research around, I mean, I know Australia, I know in Alabama, they've limited tech or eliminated tech until a certain age. Can you talk about, like, what are they finding? How has it changed? I mean, I remember when the iPad was like, ooh, our kids are getting iPads, and we were all excited that this was going to be better. And, you know, now we realize that, you know, we need to write and read real, you know, documents in order to learn. And, you know, the studies are now showing that the retention that our children are having being on devices all the time is dumbing down America.
Yeah. So I think for me, it is moving inside of everything that tech includes and asking, does this part of technology or this device or this app or platform move me closer or further away from the human experiences and connections I need to be healthy, happy, and whole? Because we know that there are life-saving technologies, including apps that go on our phone. I'm monitored for a genetic heart condition, and I've got, you know, a very smart piece of technology that's connected to an app on my phone that's going to flag if I ever have any indication of that heart issue. That's brilliant, smart AI powered technology that is humane. It's helping me be healthier, happier, and more whole. It's also helping me because the boys could inherit that health risk, and we're going to know for all of us. Also on my phone are those social media platforms with their endless scrolls, where it is addictive by design and it's driven by algorithms. And those algorithms have one intent, which is repeat use. They're not made with well-being in mind. And so when I'm endlessly scrolling, the research is very clear. There are real health risks and harms. It's going to impact my mental health, my perception of myself, my perception of my kids. And so it impacts my ability to feel happy. And it makes me feel hollow. Like, it does not make me feel more whole when I get sucked in. For our kids, what we're learning, especially our young athletes, is that there's such a connection to influencer culture. But now with the rise of AI, some of those influencers are actually AI. They're not even human. And so across the internet, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or other platforms, you have AI generated influencers, bots, who are idealized versions of a human body, who are providing kids with nutrition advice and exercise advice. And so for young people in general, I have a real like bodies over bots preference. You know, you remember like when we were teenagers, the bros before hoes. This is like bodies over bots. And that's really like what we need to think about. But of course, right now we're recording in a moment where two big things are happening in the tech space. The one is that there have been settlement lawsuits, big lawsuits by states and schools, so attorney generals and school districts, against big tech companies, saying your platforms are addictive and that they have harmed our kids. And there's also the rise of the no cell phones, you know, cell phone bans or screen-free childhoods. And what I would say to that is that we have to have a really nuanced view, meaning this. Our kids typically go on addictive tech and digital devices initially for all the right reasons, developmentally. They're bored, they want to connect, they want to create, they want to follow a celebrity or a crush that they have, or an adult told them to. The companies design their platforms to prey on those developmental vulnerabilities. So once our kids get there, they're hooked and harmed by those platforms. My concern right now in this moment of cell phone bans is that we'll focus too much on what we're taking away instead of what we're giving back. And so I just want to make sure we're very balanced, that no child should be hooked and harmed by addictive, manipulative tech. It is, in some ways, the most dangerous weather condition that we're experiencing right now, especially with the rise of things like companion bots and the rise in youth suicides and other things. But if we simply take away devices that often we asked them to go on in the first place, without focusing on those human essentials, the best parts of being human, and how we're giving that back, then we're not going to see the concerns we have right now around youth mental health, around addictive behavior, risky behavior. We're not going to see those go away because we're not addressing the root issue, which is that kids are craving the conditions and the opportunities to do the things they're meant to do, that they're made to do, like play and creativity. And so the last thing I'll say there is that I think that the antidote to addictive tech and algorithm-driven tech is an abundance of positive developmental opportunities, which youth sports, when in their best moments, actually light up all of the best parts of being human.
Yeah, when we're doing it well, which we can have a whole conversation about that too. But
Correct.
yeah,
Not always done well, but when we are.
yeah. And anecdotally, but I have a client right now who I adore, and she's a swimmer. And when we were talking about sleep, because she was getting ready for a big state championship, and she called herself out, and I completely agree with you. It's how do you, because if we just punish and we restrict, then where there's a will, there's a way. And if don't do that is the answer, then of course I'm going to want to do that, right? Like of course I'm going to want to try to do that. But when I just said no shame, but like give me a self-assessment. I mean, she added up 4 or 5 hours a day that she was on social media, and she goes, and Snapchat is a complete, or not Snap, TikTok is a complete waste of time because I'm literally getting sucked into the rabbit hole of an hour and a half a day. And I just said, what would your world look like if you could just limit that? I'm like, I'm not taking away, but could limit it. She's like, and by the way, the state championship's 2 weeks away. She's like, well, I could totally do that for 2 weeks, right? Like, and I said, again, I realize too, like somebody tells me not to eat the brownie, I'm going to eat the whole pan, right? So if you tell them you can't have it, so I gave her that opportunity the next week when we spoke. She's like, I deleted it from my phone. She was, and I PR'd, right? And yeah. And I was like, she goes, because I got to bed 30 minutes earlier. It wasn't even that much, but I opened up. So it was like such a beautiful example. And it doesn't mean that you do this and you get that every time. But I love that she made, and that's what I think exactly what you're talking about is she made the choice of, I don't need it for 2 weeks. And we talked this past week and she goes, I think one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to download it again and allow myself as a reward.
Yeah.
And I said, I think that's great. Like,
yep. Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. So I think I got sober when I was 15. So I've spent my entire later adolescence and adulthood in recovery. And I think that the basic rules of recovery apply here. These are addictive platforms that are absolutely companies pushing for profit. And they're profiting off of our attention and our repeat use. And the science behind that is sophisticated and it's well documented. I mean, very well documented. In fact, when I was writing How We Thrive, I got a book that was written by a Silicon Valley consultant who also is a researcher and professor at Stanford. And it's not a secret. He has a book that shows this manipulation matrix where it's like, okay, you're designing a product. What category do you fit in? And the last category is that you are a dealer, like a drug dealer, right? Like this is not hidden at all. And yet it is saturating our lives. So it is our job as parents to protect. We do have a responsibility to inform ourselves on which platforms are harmful and are pulling kids away from the health, happiness, and wholeness that they need and deserve, and which are not, and to be discerning. And if we are hooked, adult or child, into a particular product or platform or device, there does have to be those recovery principles of, can I accept that my life is unmanageable? Can I make a decision to do something different? And then can I work on a daily basis at taking small actions? The coolest story of this, honestly, is that 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by the Epic Times for this new trend that actually your boys kind of fall into this group, but so they're looking at Gen Zers who are at the oldest end. So this is like 22 to 25. Mm-hmm. And there is a new movement that is called the slow living movement. I learned a new word that I'm obsessed with. It's called nonamaxing, which means living like an Italian grandma. And so these young adults are choosing to live like an Italian grandma. They are on their own, getting rid of their smartphones. They're listening to records and iPods. They're like picking up crochet. They're planting gardens. But for me, this is such an unbelievably powerful signal because A 25-year-old was born right after 9/11. They started kindergarten and elementary school during the Great Recession when all of social media and smart technologies came online. And then they were graduating high school or entering post-high school life right when the pandemic was happening. They couldn't launch. Well, we know from developmental science that the end of adolescence and the start of adulthood is 25, 26 years old. So in my mind, slow living is actually them finally exerting their adult independence and saying it's rehumaning. Like, I don't want to live this way. I don't want to be so exhausted and depleted and deprived of the good things in life. And I'm going to rehuman. I'm going to reclaim that, whatever it takes. And it's a generation who had algorithms pushing them for what to wear and what to watch and what to like and all of those pieces. And so I just think it's such a unbelievably inspiring example of these young adults taking their lives back. But for our kids who are younger, I do work, as you know, I work with schools and youth programs all across the world, mostly in the US. And we are seeing that kids are spending 7, 8, even 9 hours on their devices every day. And it is devastating to me to go back to the beginning, that they go on their devices for the right developmental reasons, and then they get hurt because they're hooked and harmed into the constancy of platforms that were designed with repeat use and not well-being in mind. And that is what requires our action. But hey, I want to see those settlement dollars if the lawsuits are run. If we win settlement dollars, it would be like the tobacco settlement. I want to see those funding youth programs, youth sports, all of the positive youth developmental opportunities that give them in-person opportunities to connect and create and perform and do the good stuff.
You have a whole piece in there about regulation, and I think you're talking about is this dysregulation, and to get to the place where you're in so much pain that you realize how dysregulated you are. My son, one of his friends at college, the group all got flip phones. And again, I think, right. And they did it on their own. And in fact, I was talking to the mom, and the mom was like, well, here, let me give you his flip phone number because he's not on his iPhone anymore. But maybe he'll get the text. But it was, to your point, I love that they're now having that awakening, because that's what it takes. And I'm even finding that, because I think, again, if you're listening, you're probably looking for what are the ways that I can do this for myself. And I have an Apple Watch, which I love because it tells me that I did my 10,000 steps and that I did my workout, and that gives me that little, endorphin rush.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I can feel my brain being coated. But I'm finding myself now at 7:00 at night. In fact, I missed a client last night because I take my watch off and I put my phone away because I realize I'm not decompressing enough at night. And then in the morning, I've had now a ritual of meditation and mindfulness of an hour in the morning while my husband reads his iPad. I sit and meditate, with my dog. And my phone, I leave it on the other side of the room, and I'd be lying to say that I don't sit there and, okay, I gotta text that person. I gotta remember after I walk. Don't get your phone. Just sit there and be. Yeah. And that is so hard because as parents, and like you gave your example of, even in a 3-day period, if you're covering all the bases, like, you don't feel like you have permission to be offline. You're like, I gotta be. Right?
Yeah, because it can be risky. Like, what if I miss something that really is consequential? And but I will say, like, when I think about rehumaning in real life, one of the things that I tried 2 weeks ago, and this is kind of like just honest confessions, was like, okay, this week I'm not going to bring the phone into the bathroom with me. Like, let's just be honest. I'm not the only one who sits on the toilet, check in, whatever. And it's like, can I challenge myself before I get to your incredible move for 30 minutes of meditation, can I even just take the 30 to 45 seconds that I take to pee to not be on this device? I'm going to be human on the toilet, like.
But you have the argument with yourself. Yeah, but then I can get that text sent back,
Oh,
and I
I
can do
know.
two things at once, which nothing makes me happier than
Exactly. And
multitasking.
listen, especially for moms of young ones or parents of any variety who have younger kids, if you need to go into the bathroom and pretend to be going to the bathroom to get your minute of rest or downtime, do it. I'm talking about the fact that I cannot pee without also checking the news or checking my feeds. And that is an area that I'm trying for like rapid rehumaning. And so just the reminder that like it is all of us. And I love the flip phone example of or the slow living nona maxing of like they're not just giving up the devices. It's also the giving back of wait, what kind of music do I like? And what are my interests? And what kind of hobbies would I want with this time that has been freed up? And with time being such a scarce commodity, we should not be giving it to these companies. We should be giving it to ourselves and to the people who we care for.
You have a great section in there around creation versus consumption and how do we create. And there's some, 5 strategies for creation, a 100-day challenge, taking a class, shaping your space, which I'm a big one on too, right? When we create our environment, and so much of it is less is more. So even just purging, like when I feel dysregulated, I'm like, okay, even if it's something super small, can I reorganize that drawer, which is going to make me feel less stressed about, crap everywhere, right? Sometimes it's the little small wins that become the big, like over time, because I know it's seasonal, right? This is, we're in the dark night of the soul right now, but we're going to get through it. When I'm on the other side of it, I want to be able to be like, I didn't just waste those whatever days, minutes, months, woe is me, but I actually came out better than when I went into it.
Yeah, that's right. So this is an idea that actually kept popping up across the entire book, which is a concept coined by a Stanford professor. His name's Jeffrey Cohen. I talk about him a lot in a chapter I have on belonging, and it's called situation crafting. And the idea is that making very small shifts to our space, to our setting, to the situation we're in, instead of trying to change ourselves, can actually have really profound impact when there's nothing wrong with us. It's actually the conditions that we're in. So sometimes there are things wrong with us and we need to fix that, right? We need to work on it. But other times we're just responding to the space or to the situation. And the reality is that, as you mentioned in this chapter on creativity, so creativity is one of the human essentials. It falls into the mind category. So there are 4 mind essentials that, again, we've relied on for 300,000 years of human history. They're play, wonder, flow, and create. And so there are professors and researchers who are looking at people who are using art as what's called a social prescription. So some doctors are actually prescribing it, but people can do it on their own. And a big part of it is aesthetics, that we are, whether we want to admit it or not, deeply impacted by our space. And so if I have clutter, this isn't a Marie Kondo podcast, but if I have something that really needs to be picked up, every time I walk past it, I'm going to internally log it. And that sense of being overtapped and overworked, it's just going to contribute to that dangerous weather. It's going to make me feel like it's one more thing I have to do, one more thing on my list. And even if it's not a kind of explicit thought, I'm logging it every single time. And so to shape that situation and take the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes, if that, to quickly organize or clean up something so it looks nice it does have a biological, psychological impact on us. It really does make a difference.
Feng shui, like the whole art of, I mean, you're the Maria Kondo, but like even just something, when my son just had surgery, we were talking about that, and I walked into his closet in his little apartment, and I was speechless, and I was like, how do you live like this? And it's interesting because he's a kid who, like, his body is his temple. He's not putting, I mean, he was a kid that lived on yellow food when he was, 8 to 15. It was chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and like, but he's now completely shifted that part of his, because he's a D1 athlete. Mom, I don't even eat many carbs, all of that. And then I walked into his closet. I was like, this is such a juxtaposition for how we do one thing is how we do everything. And I said, not because you need to be anal about your space, but is that part of your healing of making sure that, and so, he couldn't do it at the time, and I helped him purge, and he came home the week, 2 weeks later after spring break, and he just said, texted me, Mom, I love you. Thank you so much for cleaning my space. I didn't realize how much it was actually impacting me.
Yeah, that's right.
And your roommates, right? So,
That's right. And we can teach our kids. I mean, so if we pull this idea of shaping our space or situation crafting into a couple of the essentials. So one of the chapters is on movement. So this is in the body essentials section, and there are 4 of them. We've talked about it a lot. It's our capacities to eat fresh food, not fake food, our capacity for sleep, for movement, and regulation, which we talked about. So for the movement chapter, I talked to just a brilliant woman, Juliet Starrett, who wrote the book Built to Move, and she and her husband, Kelly Starrett, have a podcast, and they're, really incredible athletes and the parents of a couple of teen girls. And she was talking about how, like, they have built movement into their home so that it is natural, whether it's a balance board or they actually went to the next level and had like a climbing wall on one of their walls, right? Different yoga mats, things tucked into different corners, but making it as easy as possible. It's the same with sleep. We know that we need sleep. In the book, I talk about an acronym CALM of we need it to be cool. We need all noises off. It's got to be quiet. We need the lights off. It needs to be dark. And we've got to make ourselves cozy. It's got to be comfy when we sleep. And so how do you shape your bed space and the lighting and everything else? Again, to make it in such a busy, crazy world, how are we reducing the cognitive load of when am I going to fit this in? How is this going to happen so that these things can happen? When it comes to the organized sort of aesthetic part, a part of that is just reflecting your own identity. You can celebrate your creativity by saying, like, this space feels like me. It looks like me. It also supports belonging, another essential. Like, I feel welcome and wanted here. I want to spend time here. So important for our kids as well. So I would just say that, like, while it seems silly, giving ourselves permission to shape our home environments, even our cars and other places where we're spending, especially for parents of athletes, how much time are we spending in our car, on the road, shaping those spaces to be supportive of our human essentials reduces how much time it takes to get there on a daily basis. And it just feels nicer.
Agree, right. Yeah, I'm even thinking of little things that I just stopped this, but I had HelloFresh for 7 or 8 years because, again, people are like, oh, it's so expensive, but it's one less thing that I had to think about because all of the ingredients were there. It was still fresh. I could actually ask the kids to participate, which I think that's, to me, one of the biggest weaknesses of youth sports that's caused our kids, and it's the way our society is running now, is that everything is put on the outcome of their academics and on their sport or whatever their choice of thing is. And we don't have hobbies. We don't have time to go on vacation. We don't have time to, and they're losing their sense of agency, their sense of, I am a contributor to this family because I am a member of this family. And something as little as making the family dinner, that here's the recipe, here's all the ingredients, you don't even have to be 10 to do that, right? And who cares how it actually turns out as a parent? Like, just the pride that they will feel of being able to contribute to the family meal, or you make it the night before or whatever on the weekend so that you can put it in the car, but those are the little things that I always found fun of, like, how can I beat the system or game the system, right? And Atomic Habits, he has a lot of those types of things in there, which is, if you want to learn to play guitar, leave the guitar in the middle of the floor.
That's
and
right.
Unplug the TV, right? Like, but to your point, if like the wiggle board is in the middle of the floor, you're probably going to go stand on it more often than if it's out in the garage.
That's right.
So,
right, like right in the middle of the floor. But what's so funny, Kirsten, is that is not where I thought you were going. Contribution is another human essential. But I thought you were going to like what we're in the middle of, which is how hard it is to get a healthy meal and have an appropriate dinner time when you are the family of youth athletes or you're a youth athlete yourself, and how easy it is okay, I have this chapter on eat. It's one of the body essentials, and one of the like insane things that I learned about when I was researching ultra processed foods. I was like, oh, I could just write the whole book on this, because I learned that there were a team of researchers from all over the world, and they wanted to look at all of these ultra processed ingredients. So these are the ones that are the hard to name ingredients that are made in the lab that you wouldn't find in a Nona's kitchen, right? So this is not Nona maxing. This is like lab ads, right? And so they studied these, and they did not find a single health benefit to any ultra processed preservative. Not one. The only thing that it does is shelf stability, ultra palatability. It's like, we've added sawdust to this, but we're going to make it taste like hot Cheeto, and we're going to make it bright, bright red. So if you go to like our poor athletes, again, my high school son, like, I'm in this with every parent. Okay, I've got to figure out, he has lunch at 11 a.m. for 15 minutes, but he's going to have baseball, he's going to have strength and conditioning after school, and then he's going to have a 3-hour baseball game, but he has to take the bus an hour each way. There will be a concession stand there, and how is he going to eat lunch, snacks, and dinner? And so HelloFresh is an expense, and not an expense everybody can make. But we also need to do an honest accounting of how much money are we spending on concessions, fast food, the packaged granola bars that we throw in, the 5 million meat sticks I feel like I'm ordering every single week for this kid. And are there ways to take those dollars and put them somewhere else to free up the opportunities he has to have more fresh food? And so again, it's not like, we're not perfectionists here. This is rehumaning as a practice. Fewer fake foods, more fresh foods. Those fresh foods have to be able to work inside of a modern life schedule. And that takes looking for support, and creative thinking about the resources of time and money that we have or don't have. And if we don't have the time and money, and the other teammates don't have the time and money, then getting ultra creative about, is there a rotation of parents who can we all commit to bringing a different kind of snack? Can we all commit to some kind of buffet dinner, something, right? Like, how do we also, a big theme, as you know, in How We Thrive is about sharing care, collective care. We cannot do this alone. We actually really need each other to figure these pieces out.
And I know, because just like the addictive tech, the same food is built to be addictive, right? This is why, so the more Cheetos you have, the more McDonald's you have, the more, and what value do you get out of it? None, right? So, and I had, I would offer good meals, but, the kids are, if that's what they're exposed to, then that's what they're going to crave. I actually had a doctor on a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about these kids are now addicted to the Celsius. And she said, there is nothing worse than drinking those before any type of athletic event, because it spikes your heart rate and then it crashes. And as you were talking about the lack of nutritional value, Morgan Spurlock, who did that Supersize Me, 30 days he ate McDonald's, right, and passed away 5 or 6 years ago, right, because clearly the body couldn't withstand that type of, I don't think that's news. I mean, some of these people live in, what do they call them? Food deserts, because they can't afford it, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right. Yeah, and in fact, in the book and also at rehumaning.com, because I wanted to make this a free resource, I have a list of buying fresh foods on benefits or on a really tight budget. So one of the things that I learned, which was so incredible, is that like frozen fruits and vegetables can often have a higher nutritional, like nutrient density, because they're picked and frozen at the peak of season. And so if you can't afford fresh foods, go for the frozen option and use it over time. But you're right. I talk in the book about Prime drinks, for example. So you've got two influencers who start this company. It's one of these, of course, we know, ultra popular energy drinks. And the first version of it was killing kids. It was putting them in a coma. It was sending them into seizures. There were young people who died because the caffeine and sugar levels and electrolyte levels were so high that it was messing with their hearts and with their nervous systems. But these guys who did not set out to kill kids, their subscribers on their YouTube channel were all young people, 18 and younger, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars in the first year that Prime was out. And so again, these products were not just like the tech. This is a part of our dangerous weather. The food, have we had ultra processed foods for many years now, like since the microwave? Yes. We also have more and more research on the absolute harms of them. And you're right, they are lab made for being addicted. They actually do release the feel good chemicals that keep us coming back for the chips or the Cheetos. And they're designed to be hyper palatable, to actually taste better than real food, which means that if kids are only eating ultra processed food, they will lose the taste for the real stuff. And so there is a transition period of getting them to, and eventually they will crave real food again. But can you imagine if within youth sports, if concession stands committed to offering more fresh options, just that impact alone would be significant for our young athletes and their families.
Yeah. Understanding what we're putting in our bodies. And of course, the kids are it's all connected. But I love this rehumaning discussion, because what if we could bring this to the zeitgeist, the forefront of, like the flip phone, or like the kids being Nonamaxing, and made that the cool thing. What kind of changes could we see for this next generation of kids?
That's right. I mean, again, coming on this podcast is always so wonderful for me, because I am the parent of young athletes, and I'm spending right now an obscene amount of time on the soccer sidelines and the baseball bleachers. And we are all talking about, God, did you do the before dinner or the after dinner? And like the packaged food, or, oh, is your kid exhausted too? Why are we having this game until 11 o'clock at night? And why are they doing in the book I talk about how could we move from drill and kill to feel and flow? The science of exercise and how we're made to move. But the parents on the bleachers and sidelines, we see it. We all know it. But how do we not just be passive recipients and actually do the countercultural moves of collectively taking action, asking for something different, doing what we can for ourselves and our own kids, but also being a voice for rehumaning, for really reclaiming it. Because at the end of the day, our kids have to eat. And if that means going to the concessions, that's where they're going. Or it means having the granola bar, that's what it means. They have to sleep, but they're also subject to the sports schedule and the school schedule, and they can't change it. They have to move, but if we, as the adults, are forcing them to practice and moves in ways that increases the risk of injury or burnout and not all of the good stuff, they can't say, I don't like this practice or I want to do it differently. I mean, here's what I want like you and listeners to hear. This How We Thrive is for adults and kids alike because we're all overwhelmed. Rehumaning is something we all need to do. But I've always been about the kids. And one of the things that was profoundly significant for me when I was writing this is that our kids are stuck in dehumanizing settings and they are not allowed to get up and walk out while we can. They can't walk off the field. They can't walk out of the school building. They can't say like, no, I will be coming to school every day at 8:30 or later. Thank you. Like just change my schedule. But we as adults, we have the ability to do that. This is where we do need to protect our kids. Like this is our job, learning the human essentials. We've got to learn them. There are only 14. We got to learn what they are of body, mind, heart, and spirit. And that becomes our roadmap for when it's worth being an advocate, taking action, doing something different. Otherwise, we're depriving kids. We're complicit. We're depriving our kids of the best parts of what it means to be human, and we're keeping them from the gift of thriving. And none of us want that. That's not what we got into parenting to do.
You're such an expert at this. I was going to sum it all up and ask you to give me a final thought, and then you just went ahead and laid it out there perfectly. I agree. This has been a very enlightening conversation. When does the book come out? Where can they find it? Talk about the website again. How do we get our hands on this?
Yeah, so we're recording this on April 1st, and it is available from the publisher Corwin today. It is available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the other bookstores April 14th. So if you are listening to this, you can find the book somewhere. The best way to do that is to just go to rehumaning.com. That's going to put you in touch with me. It's going to give you access to free videos and resources, and it's going to give you all the buttons so you can choose what bookstore you prefer, and also decide if you want the audiobook. And I even have the first 50 pages of the book for free there for download. So if you're unsure, you've got precious little time. So if you're unsure, just download the first 50 and decide if it's a book you want to keep reading.
And if you're an organization, you can bring Stephanie in to speak and to work with, to consult with them, right?
Absolutely. So the very best thing that I love doing more than anything else in the world is working with schools and youth programs, whether it's the Y, Boys and Girls Clubs, 4-H, big school districts, private schools, homeschool co-ops. And that can be a combination of just coming and speaking about what we talked about today, rehumaning school and summer and sports. But it can also be consulting work. I have deep experience in the trenches on the front lines working with kids and the adults who care for them. So would love to explore that. And for groups, you can find that info on rehumaning.com as well.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I always enjoy connecting and learning from you. Every time I listen to you, like you have such great wisdom and insight, and you're able to take all that research and then make it, oh, okay, it's completely understandable. And that's what I think we're all looking for, are great tools. So thank you so much for the privilege of your time and for partnering with me on this journey, because this is what makes it so much fun.
I'm so glad to be in this with you. This was a wonderful conversation, and here's to many more.
Yes, many, many more.
And
Parents,
humaning our lives.
yes, let's do this whole rehumaning thing. I'm adopting that. We're going to be rehumaning over here too. So yeah, like, subscribe, share. This will go up on Substack too. You'll see opportunities. If you have questions, you can go onto my website and send topics that you wanna hear more about. I'm always learning and growing and failing and standing back up and trying to do it all over again. Let's do this.